Cancer, this is your tarot reading for February. And the central card, the King of Pentacles. This not only tells me what the reading's about, but the energy runs throughout all the other cards and the energies, if you like. King of Pentacles is somebody that's good with money. So is this reading about money? It would certainly seem to be. If we look to your recent past, we have the Knight of Swords. He's a very brave knight. He's a very bold knight. Quite a ferocious knight. But does sometimes tend to get hold of the wrong end of the stick. I think that might be important. Right now you're feeling very charitable. Now I think we're all aware that times have changed, and being charitable is a very good reaction to it. In the future we have the energy of strength. So this is the universe saying to me that whatever's going to be thrown at you during February, you're strong enough to deal with it. And I think one of those things that is thrown at you is at least a feeling of poverty, maybe a feeling of being on your own. But it's often just a feeling. And there's always hope. If you look at the card, well, yes, it's a demolished or half-built or half-demolished chapel. But there's that beautiful window there. So there's always help if you cry out. What would change the outcome is you seeking out something a bit more creative, a bit different. Now, this feeling of poverty that you have leads to the outcome, and the outcome is the Knight of Pentacles. He's strong, he's brave, he's determined, he's somebody that you can rely on, but he's painfully slow. Now, there's no indication really that you're manifesting money here, but is it that money you're expecting is coming very slowly? Certainly feels like it could be that way. You may know that my mother died just over a year ago, and the estate was held up in what do they call it? Yeah, in probate for about a year. And as it happens, I actually got more for the house than I was anticipating. Maybe not more than I was anticipating, when I thought it would be sold a year previously, but nevertheless, I was rather happy with the outcome. And it was through auction, and I thought it meant that I'd get my money in a couple of weeks, but no. It's next year before that happens, and even then there'll be a lot to tie up. So I think it's an example of something like this that's happening here. But look, this looks interesting, Cancer, so stick with me to see what exactly is happening. Now, what normally tells me what the reading is about is this card here, which is the energy of the King of Pentacles. King of Pentacles. And I normally say, well, this is someone who's good with money, somebody that understands money. But I wonder if it's just telling me that it's about money. It could simply mean that. I mean, maybe you are good with money. But there's certainly delays here. Things aren't happening as you expect them to be happening. But maybe through no fault of your own. And I think that's how the world is now. I use the example of my mother's estate being held up in probate. And, there's nothing I could have possibly done about it. I actually gave power of attorney to the solicitor, but I don't think they could have done more. But I know most people would have been panicking and phoning up on a regular basis. But, it's not in your hands. Sometimes you just have to give things over to the universe, to God, to Allah. So maybe it's just that we should take from this. Last we have the Knight of Swords, the most ferocious knight of all. A knight that's brave, a knight that's bold, a knight that's fearless. But he can get hold of the wrong end of the stick, rushing into conclusions about things that are incorrect. And I can't help but think that that's what it's telling us here. That you haven't got the full picture on something. You've jumped to a conclusion that is erroneous. I might be wrong, it might simply be that you're fearless, but I feel there's a bit more to it than that. We're all aware of a paradigm shift, that a cycle has come to an end, a new one has begun, and we're all searching around for what we should do. But right now you're being charitable, which is one of the things we certainly should do. Fill our lives full of love, be compassionate, understanding towards others. Is it simply about giving money or giving things to others? Or is it about being charitable in your assessment of others? And could that be linked to you jumping to conclusions? I really don't know. But this is an energy for now, and it strikes me as a good energy and the right energy to have. So I do see it as a good omen. I have to say there are some things in this spread that aren't entirely positive. But the universe is wanting to reassure you that you're strong. And I've been getting this card for a lot of signs recently, in the context of that, you know, we're going through a time of unprecedented change. Some might call it unprecedented evil. I wouldn't choose to use that word. But certainly a time of fear porn, a time of change, a time when we must all adapt to change, a time when maybe we shouldn't rush to conclusions about what is happening. And this card crops up to say, look, whatever's happening, remember you have this wonderful inner strength, and this wonderful inner strength will see you through it. So I see it as a wonderfully reassuring card to have. This challenge, well, I believe the challenge is a feeling of poverty. Could be a feeling of no friends, being on your own. It could be both. Certainly, you know, if you do feel like you're struggling, often you don't turn to friends to try and get them to help you, when there's always people there who can help you out. But we tend to sort of give up and hold it to ourselves rather than reaching out. I think it's a card of fear, to be perfectly honest. I think a lot of it could be in your mind. But, you know, I say it's in your mind, but, you know, there's so much fear porn out there. I think it's sometime next year when all countries in the world are signed up to having central bank digital currencies. So money as we know it will eventually, or the idea is for it to disappear. And already in Indonesia, the ATMs, they've been taking ATMs away. You know, there are fewer and fewer ATMs. And yet the queues to get money out are getting bigger and bigger. And I've been told at one of my banks in Jakarta that ATMs are no longer going to dispense money. Now, okay, in Jakarta, young people pay using their mobile phones. The middle class have plastic. But in the country, there really is no alternative. It's a cash society. Often, mobile phones, there isn't sufficient coverage for such things to work. Now, that didn't stop the Indonesian government from imposing a supposed health app on us that tracks our movements and who we're with, and etc. But it didn't work. It didn't work in remote areas. So there isn't the infrastructure to do away with money. But maybe it won't stop them. But of course the whole project is doomed to failure in the end. If only people sort of starting to barter amongst themselves. So, I can understand your fear. But I think this spread is also saying that don't give in to the fear. Remember that strength card. You're strong. Together we're much stronger than the machinations of those who see themselves as our betters. Now, that feeling of poverty gives way to the outcome, which isn't necessarily a bad outcome, and I'll come to that in a minute. But what would change the outcome is you seeking out creative ideas, you seeking out something different. And I think, when we're confronted with things like central bank digital currencies, which clearly aren't going to work, we need to be prepared to think outside the box, to think of radical solutions. And, that might be bartering, it might be many things. I mean, it's assumed that barter is an alternative and what we used to do. But I know from living in the mountains of Java, if people have a surplus, they simply give it to their neighbours. And when their neighbours have a surplus, they simply give it to you or to another neighbour. So it might be a case of, if we can use some sort of creative thinking, that the downsides that maybe are contained in this seem to be nothing. And indeed, if we do come up with our own community-based alternatives to what those who think themselves are betters are doing, then for sure their project will collapse. Outcome, as I say, I don't think is a bad outcome. Knight of Pentacles. He's a very dependable knight, gets the job done. So I think quite admirable. But he's one step in front of the other. He's painfully slow compared to the other knights. Now, I use the example of my mother's estate being in probate and having to wait a year for probate. I mean, there can be no excuse for that, can there? No excuse whatsoever. I mean, I don't even pay UK tax. So how on earth can it be delayed for a year? To my mind, the whole mandate of government is destroyed when they can't even do simple things like that in a reasonable time. My passport took me 5 months to get, and I required it to go and see my dying mother. How can governments claim to have a mandate when they cannot even fulfil the basic requirements of humanity, of their electorate? I mean, it shows a total contempt for us, doesn't it? It really does. But you know what I think? Let's use another illustration. If we talk about central bank digital currencies, or more so, for example, ATMs in Jakarta no longer dispensing money. Now, you might say, well, just go into the branch. But even in Jakarta, that takes an hour. And here in Gun and Keedle, because the banks have lent so much money, I think irresponsibly, you could easily wait 4 hours just to get service at a bank. So, we can't be waiting 4 hours every time we want to draw money. So I've been drawing money and secreting it round different places, just in case we're met with this problem. It'll run out after a few months for sure, but, at least it's something positive that I can do. So there are ways around these things, there are ways around these things, and we're being implored to think creatively about them. So let's get some clarification on what I'm saying. To get some clarification on this feeling of poverty, and I do believe it's a feeling. If our money gets locked up in banks and we can't access it, you would feel like you're in poverty. That's only an illustration, but it's a potential one. So this feeling of poverty, the first card of clarity is that of nightmares. So it is a feeling, isn't it? It's about your worries. The next card is a card of being careful with money, being miserly. So it's very much about feelings. And the final card is another card suggesting if you think creatively, you will find ways around it. First card of clarity is the card of nightmares. Now, going back to this thing about the ATMs not dispensing money, is this fake news? And I don't think the security guard at my bank made it up. There must be some validity in it. And he did say it was only an idea, it wasn't being instituted yet. But the ATMs are disappearing, for sure. That very same bank, I'm getting messages regularly that look important, but I'm ignoring them. I'll go into the bank and discuss them. But they seem to want me to confirm my identity. Well, it's already a bank account. I've already been through that. So there is something going on, but are all these things designed to feed our fears? I can't help but believe that is it. So, you were told you were strong, so you must resist these nightmares, you must resist your deepest fears. Card of energy. The next energy is about being careful with your money. I sometimes call it the miser card. And I think you do have a bit of a miser mentality, And that's, as I say, I'm sure this feeling of poverty is in your mind. So I think it does add to that feeling of that. But, there is such turmoil in the world. Maybe we're wise to hang on to things. And maybe we're all going to have to adjust to a different life with less money. How are we going to adjust? Well, I live up a mountain and grow my own food and medicine. So, I've already made that adjustment. And I know you're saying, but I can't do that. I live in I live in New York. I live in Los Angeles. I rent this expensive apartment. I've got a note to pay on the Lamborghini, I think we all need to reappraise our lives. But having said that, I'm sure that so much of this is in our minds. It's due to the fear porn that's out there. And once again, we're being urged to think creatively. And I've told you about, how we might think creatively of a world without money. But maybe this is asking us to think creatively about what we really want out of life. And maybe this is about saying to ourselves, what do we really want? What really makes us happy? I know you'll be saying, well, my apartment in Manhattan, it might be expensive, but I'm happy with it. My Lamborghini, I treasure. But I think if we really explore what we really want, they're very different things. And this applies to those who call themselves our betters as well. I know what they get up to on their luxury yachts and the same thing that goes on in private islands in the Caribbean. We all know what's going on. But is it actually making them happy? Or is it not more an indication of a deep sadness within them? And I think we need to reflect on these things and cut ourselves a simpler, better life. Because there's no doubt change has happened, and more change will happen. And we need to know what will truly make us happy in order for us to reach out for it. So, Cancer, I'm pretty certain that this reading is about your response to global events. Things have changed dramatically. You know largely how to respond to it. But there's so much fear out there, and you are succumbing to it. And I think it is fear over money. How can I keep doing this? How can I do that? And you might have got hold of the wrong end of the stick somewhere, but you know that you need to be more charitable. The world's going to be more charitable. The new world is one of less greed, even though there seems to be more greed, but they'll get their comeuppance, don't worry about it. And the universe wants you to know that you're strong, and you'll get through this, don't worry. But you are fearful about money, you're fearful about poverty. I think it's just in your head, but you are fearful. In fact, so fearful it's giving you nightmares. You're perhaps being careful with money, which maybe is no bad thing, but what you really need to do is be much more creative and think, well, what do I really need in life and what's going to bring it to me? Having said that, the truth is that this feeling of a shortage of money is, I believe, a temporary thing. It's something that will get resolved. And I know you're shouting at me and saying, oh, central bank digital currencies, etc., etc., etc. None of this is going to work. None of this is going to work. You think through, how are we going to do things? And it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It only makes sense for people who think that they can control humanity, think that they're God. They'll get their comeuppance. They will. And we will find a better way of living without them. So, it is time of dramatic change. But don't let the fear porn get to you, Cancer.